Welcome, everybody, to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I am the Assistant Manager of Visitor Experiences at the museum. Thank you so much for joining us today for another program in our 2021 series. And welcome back to those of you who have joined us before. This is our first one in about a month. We've kind of slimmed down our summer schedule because everybody's out having fun and traveling. So I'm excited to see you guys again. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics and stories of our collection that you can experience from the comfort of your home. And we'll plan to continue these programs regularly. So if you have a presentation or a show that you'd like to share related to the museum mission or the trolley era, please let me know, and I will put my email in the chat box shortly. It's assistant@patrolley.org. It could be anything from maybe the cities where the trolleys came from, Pennsylvania Transit. We're always looking for new programs. And you can see a full list of upcoming presentations on our website at patrolley.org, and I can share that in the chat box in just a few minutes as well. And I want to extend a special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program, and those who have made donations through our website over the past year, specifically because of these Trolleyology programs. We truly appreciate your support of our virtual outreach programs. All right, so for those who might be new to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we were established in 1954 as the Art and Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. The museum opened to visitors a few years later in 1963 and is actually located along the route of the trolley line between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find almost 50 trolley cars and electric railway cars here, about 20 of which operate. About 30,000 people visit per year and take the 4-mile scenic ride here at the museum. And we are now open with our full schedule Tuesday through Sunday from now through August. So we're open 10 to 4. I hope you can come see us. The last ticket is sold at about 3 o'clock. You get to ride 2 trolleys. It's a great time, and I hope you can come visit us. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Sarah Wells. Sarah basically grew up at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. She volunteers in operations, power and signal, restoration, and more. Sarah is a technology education teacher in Lawrence County, and she's always liked horses and actually owns a horse named Lucy. Once again, this program will be available on our YouTube within the next week or so. And again, at the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session with Sarah, but the chat box will be open. So please feel free to enter comments or questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. Sometimes our other members will actually know the answer, so I don't even have to ask Sarah. So please keep your microphones muted and your videos turned off during the presentation so that Sarah has all the bandwidth available and so we don't have any accidental interruptions. I will invite you to turn them back on at the end. And that's about all I have. Sarah, take it away.
Will do. Hopefully this works. Okay, so horse cars are a very broad topic, so I can't give you everything that is available on horse cars, but I'm going to try and hit the main points of how they were really important to the beginnings of electric street railway transportation and electric transportation in general. So hopefully my computer comes back. Hello.
It's thinking about it.
It is thinking about it. This is what I get for using a 9-year-old computer.
People are generally very patient in the era of Zoom, so
which is good.
Which is good. Technology can't work right all the time, so
no, and that is what I teach people. I am a technology education teacher. This last school year, I was transferred to being an elementary education teacher, so I teach computers to tiny people, and that has just made me figure out just how patient I am. Okay, I'm not getting anything yet. Hold on, we'll try this again.
At least it doesn't appear to be frozen.
No, it does not appear to be frozen. It's a matter of it realizing where it is. Sorry, everyone.
We also have thunderstorms in the area, so bear with us if we have some internet glitches tonight.
Okay, so hopefully this will do it.
We're spinning.
We are. It's thinking about it. It says it's starting. It says starting.
And you guys know, of course, we practiced this beforehand and it was working just fine. But it'll come up in a minute, I'm sure.
It will. Again, if you have any questions, please point them towards the chat, which you should find at the bottom of your screen for the most of you. So horsing around, the horse cart, and the origins of mass transportation, urban mass transportation, because the horse car was really the first vehicle that allowed people to get from place to place on their own time, with their own money and transportation. Because before that, people walked everywhere. Urban centers were filled with people going from place to place, and you were either a person that was walking to get somewhere, or you were rich enough to have your own vehicle, such as a carriage or a wagon, or you were specifically using that conveyance for your business. You might be a cab driver or some sort of a porter or a teamster that was taking cargo place to place. But it wasn't that you just had some form of transportation like we have today with cars. You can just go anywhere, anytime you want. When you had horses and you lived in a city, you had to have a place for them to be able to stay. You had to have somebody that was going to be capable of driving them or riding them. You'd have to pay for all of the maintenance for everything, as well as if you had a carriage or something like that, you'd have to pay for the space and maintenance for that. So when the Industrial Revolution hit in the late 18th century, the masses started flooding to the city centers from farms and villages, and this had never really happened before. People wanted to be able to get from place to place more readily and more quickly than they could on foot. And it was very expensive at that time to take a cab or a stagecoach from through town or through the cities. So they needed to come up with ways to move people more efficiently from place to place. So the first thing to appear were horse railroads and omnibuses. A horse railroad is just like it sounds. It is a railroad, rails put on top of the roadway, and then you pull the cars with a horse. That is the motive power. Before the steam engine was invented, that's how they moved things around. So those railroads were either wood or iron rails. Sometimes the wood had iron on top of it to make it stronger. And then the cars were pulled by horses. In Wales, one of the early uses was actually on a gravity railroad, where they used the horses to pull the wagons up to the top of the hill, where they loaded them up with slate. The horse was loaded into this type of car here called a dandy, and they would ride back down the hill on the gravity train. And the only thing that would make it go or stop was the brakes on the individual cars. The other type of transportation for cities and around cities before railroads and before, well, big railroads with steam engines and stuff, were omnibuses. An omnibus was basically a gigantic wagon, or you might call it an inner city stagecoach. They went through the city streets, usually on a set route, but much like today's bus, where the bus got its name from, you could change the route fairly easily on an omnibus. But it did run into the problem of needing good roads to be able to get through and to be comfortable for people. An omnibus was notorious for getting bogged down because it was overburdened with people, or if the roads were muddy or bad or rocky and bumpy, they would be very, very uncomfortable or just not get you anywhere. That's why they had the gigantic wheels on them, was to help even out some of that bumpiness. So the first big innovation was John Stephenson's John Mason, which debuted in New York City on November 27th, 1832. As you can see, it's built a lot like a railroad carriage of the time that trains would run on out into the hinterlands. Steam locomotives were just beginning to be used in this instance, but this was for in the city. So they used horses as a cleaner and safer way of transporting people within the city, because a lot of people were very hesitant about having steam locomotives in a city center because they had intrinsic dangers like the boiler exploding. Plus there's a lot of smoke and stuff. So what made the horse car different from those previous omnibuses, horse railroads, and even that earliest Stephenson horse car was the rail. In 1852, Alphonse Labat, who was a French designer and inventor, created the first grooved rail, girder rail, that would allow the road surface to be flush with the railhead itself, so that you didn't have that problem where you would have to go up and over the rails somehow. And it allowed for that space where the flange, which is the part that holds the wheels into that space, they would have somewhere to go. So once that was invented, and once people came up with new ideas for different types of grooved rail or step rail or rails that would be even with a surface, then you really start seeing the explosion of street railways, which you hear the term streetcar and most people think of something electric, but really streetcar before about 1890, it was the common term used for what we call today horse cars. A streetcar was used in the streets and was powered by horses or mules or some other form of animal. So this is an example, a cutaway view of Labat's grooved rail. It was actually mounted on top of a wooden base that was then put underneath the roadway, and the wheel would run along that groove in the top of the rail. So what made streetcars go? What made those horse cars go? Well, it was going to be the horse or a mule or teams of these animals as motive power. They were the engine of a street railway. You had to have at least one horse per car, but depending on your terrain, depending on the length of your line, and depending on the size of your horses, you may need pairs of horses. You may need more than that. And a horse can only work for so many hours a day without breaking down very quickly. So you also need to have multiple single or teams of horses to work on the different trolley or on the different streetcar lines, wherever it may be. Just in the city of Pittsburgh, in 1885, there were actually over 1,700 horses employed on the various horse car lines throughout the city. I found this information from the Street Railway Journals. The first editions were from 1884, 85, and you can find all of those online. They are free through the Smithsonian Institution. So there's tons of really interesting information that you can find there. There were also nearly 300 horse cars, vehicles that were used on those different streetcar lines. So you had to have the motive power, which was, again, horses or mules. And you might ask, why would you need a different type of animal? Why would you use horses instead of mules? Well, a horse is probably going to be a little bit more expensive in some ways because they can reproduce themselves, whereas a mule is a sterile creature. But a mule is generally considered hardier. They definitely are much better in hotter climates. A mule, in case you don't know, is a cross between a horse and a donkey. So a mule has the background, the ancestry of those donkeys that are much better in hot climates, in damp climates, like heat doesn't affect them as much. So they're known for being very strong workers. These are just some examples of receipts of the types of things that you would have to do with your animals. $850 for 8 head of horses back in 1890 was a substantial outlay for any streetcar company. They may have to pay more, they may have to pay less. You also have to do lots of other things for your horses. You have to keep them groomed. So that means you have to employ stablemen or ostlers in your stables. You have to have them shod. So that means you have to pay for farrier work. A farrier is the person that actually shoes the horse today. But at the time, a farrier did a lot more things than just shoeing horses. They would be kind of a layman veterinarian. They would have all different things that they would do for the horses. You have to feed them. You have to bring in hay. And most importantly, you have to get rid of all the waste. Back in that time, the waste was an extremely important commodity because they were doing more industrial forms of farming. And so they needed to replenish the soils a lot more. So the fertilizer you would get from all that horse manure was very important. But when you have thousands upon thousands of horses in a central location, that's a lot of manure. Horses generally will produce about 50 pounds of manure and urine a day. So that adds up quickly when you have thousands of them that you have to get rid of that for. So horses lived in the cities. Especially in big cities, you might be surprised to know that many of them did not live on the ground floor. Now, some streetcar operations felt that that was important, that they build their barns somewhere that they could have everything on one level. But in big cities, especially New York, Boston, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, many of the streetcar barns or car houses were actually on the ground floor. It was where you housed the cars themselves. And then on the second, third, and sometimes even fourth floors, you would find the horse stabling areas. They used ramps. And in fact, today in New York City, the carriage horses that work there, many of them live in these vertical stables, basically. They live up a few flights because the cost of property is so high that you can't just spread out easily. So these are different examples of horse car barns. We've got, there's a Connecticut barn. There's actually the depot for, in San Francisco, it's the not pier. It's the harbor freight house. That's what that top left image is. The top right one, I'm having trouble remembering, and I don't see it here in my notes. And then the ones on the bottom were actually in Kansas City, or not Kansas City, in Topeka. So even Topeka, Kansas had a relatively large horse car barn. Warren, Pennsylvania had horse cars, and you'll see a picture of that later. So there was a lot of diversity in horse cars. There wasn't just cars for, that looked like an old-fashioned omnibus or a wagon. There were cars that had all different capabilities. The top left that you see there, that's Ontario, if I'm not mistaken, or Ottawa. And in the wintertime, in some Canadian cities, there's so much snow that they would actually equip their horse cars with sled runners and run them through the streets that way. On the top right-hand side, you see a very funny looking car. That's a bubble car. And that was designed to be able to turn around, to pivot. And that, Kristen and I discussed this yesterday, the awning part at the top not only is like a roof for the car, but it allows both ends to be covered. And that appears to be the whole idea of having the shape like that. It is weird. But that's also a bobtail style of car. Now you hear that term bobtail, and what that means is that the entrance to the car is right there at the back of the car. You walk right in, and you can have a one-person operation that way. The people are just paying through the front to the driver of the horses or mules, as the case may be. There were open cars, and later on we'll talk a little bit about the Sherilyn car that actually had a place for the horse, just like that gravity railroad way back in the early 1800s. It has a place for the horse to ride back down the grade that it has to pull. Another example of the diversity of horse cars is this is the oldest known horse car in preservation. It is an 1850s horse car from the city of New York. It was actually donated from the Museum of the City of New York to the Branford Electric Railway, otherwise known as Shoreline Trolley Museum, a few years ago, 2016, that sounds right. And they are preserving that oldest car, which is, again, one of those bobtail designs. And this is the Stevenson patent for not the build itself, but the mechanism to allow the brakes to still work when the car pivots around, because this car pivots on that central point. So you don't have to go in a loop, and you don't have to have a turntable. You can actually pivot the whole body of the car on that truck mechanism, but most importantly, the brakes will still work. Because one of the things that you may notice, I don't know why that picture is sideways, but this shows that it was a one-person operation. It was that it was a reversing bobtail design, and you would step into the back of the car, and then you could pay the driver right there at the front. But you can't see that because it's sideways. I don't know why it's sideways. Okay, some other interesting things that you may find are the horse-drawn snow sweepers. Snow sweepers, you might think, were invented to be an electric railway thing, but in fact, they were invented to be pulled by horses. You can see that it looks like a sleigh with those big brooms underneath, just like a streetcar, snow sweeper in the electric era was. However, you would need a team of between 6 and 12 horses to pull them. The Andrews and Clooney Company actually puts in their advertisement that they have the full-size version, which takes between 10 and 12 horses to pull, or you can get the 3/4 version for 6 to 8 horses. So this is a picture from Canada, from Toronto, Canada, of them actually using one of these horse-drawn snow sweepers to keep their line clear. I only found this picture today, so I don't have as much information as I might like to have about it. But I thought it was just fascinating that early on, that ground driven, because there's no electric motors, there's no engine on it. It has to be ground driven, and they talk about how they try to put all the weight down. It has solid wheels to keep the weight down near the base so that it's not tippy, and so you have to put less stuff on that open deck. That was why the deck was open, so you could put extra weight on there to give it enough traction for those brooms to spin. So that's just an interesting thing that I thought. And where were horse cars found? Horse cars were found absolutely everywhere throughout the country and really the world. From the town of Warren, Pennsylvania, which is that lower left-hand side, tiny town, they had horse cars. Middletown, Ohio, had horse cars. Topeka, Kansas, had horse cars. Boston, it's a big city, they had horse cars. So those are the 4 examples that I have here on where were they found, but I have lots more coming.
Before we back to horse cars, Catherine Black has a question.
Okay.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but doesn't the broom send the snow just past the back legs of the back pair of horses?
It does. The horses are actually here. We'll go back to that for a second. Hello. Okay. Yes, it does. But 2 things are going on. Number one, if you look carefully at that picture, I don't know if maybe I can zoom in on it. Nope. If you look closely here, they actually have the canvas just like when we take our sweeper out, there's canvas over those brooms to help limit the amount of fling that actually goes on, to keep it sweeps off the rails, but it just pushes it off to the side a little bit more. And if you look, the angle of these brooms is actually a little bit steeper, or at least I feel like it's a little steeper to fling it more off to the side, because they didn't have to worry about, you know, cars and things like that on the side of the road. So they could push it more off to the side rather than straight ahead. Or at least that's what I've taken from that. I can't see anybody, so I'm guessing it's going okay. Does that answer suffice?
Works for me.
Okay. So some of the earliest railway transportation was the Mumbles train. It started out as a limestone quarry horse railroad, but became in 1804 the first passenger. They were given permission by Parliament to become a passenger railway and charge money to ride as a passenger on their train from Swansea to Mumbles, I think, or vice versa. And it was actually one of the longest running passenger railways anywhere in the world. It ran all the way until 1960. There are a couple other railroads that claim that they were longer lived, but that's mostly because they were counting their time as just transportation of goods instead of transportation of people. So that was the Mumbles train. They had several different versions. You can see this very early I believe they said this was 40s, although everybody looks like they're nice and still. So I'd say it's probably a little later than that. And then this is from 1960 when they were closing the line. New Orleans, one of the earliest examples in the United States of horse cars, other than New York City, because they were the first. And New Orleans still has streetcars today on some of the same lines within the city. I'm trying to remember, I wrote down the number and I'm not sure where it is, of the number of cars and horses and mules that they had in the city of New Orleans. But you notice that this horse car is pulled by only one horse. They were using a smaller car and they had a very, very level line, to the point that when we got our New Orleans car, it didn't have a handbrake because it didn't need one, because it doesn't go up or down anywhere. It's very level. So that's just another thing to notice, is that some lines or some types of equipment, you need a lot more horsepower than others. Throughout the world, there were horse cars. Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Paris, France, Honolulu, Hawaii. And you notice that in a warm environment, they've got an open car instead of a closed car. Havana, Cuba, they get a lot of rain there. They also have closed cars. Brooklyn, a very early car, that's from the 1850s. Philadelphia, they had very early streetcar operations, and actually one of the earliest, I forget what I was going to say. So Washington, D.C., there were horse cars that ran directly in front of the Capitol. Some of you may not have known that. And again, that bubble car from San Francisco that could turn around without having a loop or a turntable. The Cherlin line, I talked about this just briefly earlier. It was near Denver, and they actually used the horse. And it's famous because people are like, oh, the horse rode on the trolley. It did, and it ran very late comparatively. But it wasn't the only horse car that actually used this method. In Upland, California, they had a similar, but they had a whole trailer for their pair of horses, because they must have had heavier loads and probably a steeper trip than the Englewood Cherlin horse car. But it was very famous. There were tons of horse car or Cherlin postcards and things like that throughout the years, because it was a popular thing to see the horse hop on the back of the horse car. There are a couple different horse car manufacturers that I want to point out. The first one is Stevenson. There's an excellent book. If you love looking at old pictures, the John White book based on the I believe it was 1885, Stevenson portfolio archives of all of their types of cars that they were building at that time. It was produced, I believe, by the Smithsonian. It has all these different styles of cars that were built by Stevenson for all different places throughout the world. From a sleeper car that went to some line in either South America or Mexico, I can never remember which, and I didn't get a chance to check, to just normal everyday horse cars like you'd find in Pittsburgh, which that's what our horse car is, or anywhere else. The next one, of course, is Brill. We have lots of Brill cars here at the Trolley Museum, and they were building horse cars even before they started building electric cars. And they were common also throughout the world. Brill actually had operations in Europe and South America to build cars there. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you an example of a Brill car that still exists today. So what became of the horse cars and the horses? Streetcar lines would still use horses even after they closed down the horse car lines. Some horse car lines lasted longer because they might have only served a small line that it would be difficult to electrify, or it might be owned privately. And so the person maintains that use of the right of way in the street. Some horse cars went into use as electric cars, either for special purposes like the one that you see at the top, or sometimes they actually got new trucks with electric motors. They had the roof reinforced so that it would hold the pole and the equipment on the roof, and they would use them as electric cars after that. But many horse cars didn't have that same fate. They would get used as outbuildings. They would get used as other things. And a lot of this is because of the epizootic of 1872. The epizootic was the equine influenza outbreak, much like we just had with humans last year. The epizootic is equine influenza. It is still a thing today, but it is much, much, much more rare because there is a vaccine for it. My horse gets it every year. So it started in the city of Toronto, and the main problem with equine influenza is that it puts horses out of commission. You can't use them because they're ill. I mean, it is the flu. They are sick. They have no energy. It doesn't kill most of them. However, when we were talking about having thousands upon thousands of horses that are out of work, you don't get a lot done. In fact, there was a mini depression or a recession or whatever you want to call it in 1872 because everything ground to a halt. Street railways ground to a halt because there weren't enough healthy horses to be able to pull all of the horse cars. There weren't horses to transport things from the railroads worked, but they couldn't work because they could only get goods so far before they needed a horse and wagon to pick up the stuff and take it somewhere else. So everything in the United States ground to a halt because of this. In fact, later on in 1872, Mexico actually sent horses to the United States to help fill in the gaps of sick horses. It was only about 1% mortality, but also 1% mortality with that many horses in any given place, and with a nearly 100% what's the word I'm looking for? Passing the disease. Horses are going to get it, and if you have 1% of 1,000 horses, that's 10 horses that you're losing, and 10 horses is a lot of stuff you have to render and get rid of. So, and it could be 2, 3, even 4 weeks that a horse could be off for this disease. So those 2, 3, 4 weeks end up really wreaking havoc on civilization. They needed to find a better way. And I thought I had skipped this slide, so we're going to skip it for now. And so it was really important that the electric car came about. This is the Frank J. Sprague electric horse car, or electric trolley in Richmond, Virginia, I believe. Pretty sure that's it. And it was really the start of the end of horse cars. So horse cars were great, but there were lots of drawbacks to them. You have horse exhaust, as I call it, which I mentioned earlier, up to 50 pounds a day per horse. And when you have thousands of horses, that's a lot of material. In fact, there were debates about London and New York City that they, by 1900, they would be filled to the second floor windows of all the buildings and things like that. So coming up with an electric solution that was easier and cheaper than the other alternatives, such as there were the cable cars, which used a steam powered cable somewhere out on the outskirts, and that cable would be wound through the city streets, but that's very expensive to build that infrastructure. They had different methods of collecting electricity. In Pittsburgh, they used the Vandepol slot system, which again, that's a lot of infrastructure. You have to dig big trenches through the street. So there were lots of different things that they tried before Frank J. Sprague came up with his solution of a pole with a wheel on the end of it, which is where the trolley gets its name. And that's why you won't catch me, without doing it by accident, calling a horse car a trolley. They are not trolleys by definition. They don't use electricity. They don't have a pole on the roof. Some horse cars were changed into trolleys, but for the most part, they had other uses. Carville by the Sea, which was near San Francisco, on the beach, old horse cars were taken and built into various apartments, cabins. There's even one that still they're pretty sure exists today in a part of San Francisco. But horse cars didn't have a lot of value. Other than the brass fittings that you might find some places on them, there wasn't a lot of metal, because it was really important that a horse car was lightweight. So many of them just got left out in fields. They got sold off as chicken sheds. They were used as children's playhouses, or even because they weren't really built for it, they were used as trailer cars for the larger, newer electric cars. Our horse car actually was used that way in parades. And this image here is a image I found sometime last year. It's in the collection of the Carnegie Museum of Art. They didn't know what it was, but this is our horse car. You can tell that it's our horse car because it's pretty late. This looks like the late 19-teens, early 1920s. It's our horse car because it's 8-windowed, and it was one of the few that was still in Pittsburgh. It's being pulled by a team of mules, and if you look carefully at the street, you'll see that there's no rails. They were just using it as an example for some reason. We wish we knew why. If anybody has an idea, that'd be great. But it is parked next to the Nixon Theater, and we think that it's possible that that is part of the reason that it's there. You can, if you look carefully, you can see that it's actually being followed by what appears to be a line truck. So it must have been something that Pittsburgh Railways was doing, but we don't know what. Pittsburgh had many types of horse cars, and for the most part, Pittsburgh was a horse car city, not a mule car city. We did have one line out towards Oakland, and that's probably why the last horse cars were pulled by mules. And but there's lots of other lines throughout the city. Citizens Passenger Railway. That's another thing that I wanted to point out was some streetcar lines actually changed, the company changed their name between when they were horse cars, and they wanted to make it sound different when they became a streetcar, electric streetcar line. So instead of using the word passenger railway, they would change it to traction. Traction usually was a sign that you were either using steam, or you were using cable, or you were using electric. That denoted that difference between using animals, which some people may or may not have liked, and using the newfangled electricity and things like that. So many different lines. This is the long line that it went out towards Butler, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure how it got there. And then this is our horse car when it was on display as the Federal Street in Pleasant Valley #3. Now, Dad can explain why it was #3 because I can't remember, but ours now is 101. That was on the lowest layer of stuff, and that was in the archives when it was purchased or taken over by Pittsburgh Railways in 1896, I think. I'll check that. So this is our horse car on display as the old tech at the exhibition building down at near Points, or within the space of Point State Park. You can see that it's being used as an example of this is the old stuff, and here on the left, you'll see the new low floor streetcars that had just arrived. I believe this is 1915, if I remember correctly, that this picture is from. So that was really the first restoration of our horse car, was that. They added these extra large platforms on the ends. They, according to legend, they used it in parades. I have yet to find any evidence, like pictures or anything of that, but eventually I might find something. So our horse car has had a long and storied past. It was used as one of the as the last car on the Union covered bridge, which was the last covered bridge in the city of Pittsburgh that crossed the Allegheny River from near the point over to Manchester. It's what was replaced by the Manchester Bridge. This is the last horse car in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh actually had horse cars until 1923, and it was one of the last places in the United States that had horse cars in regular operation. Now, again, you'll notice those are mules. The driver, and that's another term that you'll hear used, is in the United States, most of the time a trolley, a streetcar, is operated because it's run by a person and it's an electric operation. However, back then they were drivers because you're having the animal, you're driving the animal forward and they're pushing into their collar around their neck they're not pulling, they're pushing the horse car. That's how they see it. So they're pushing into that collar and they're making it go forward. And that's the driver is that person. In some countries, that's the term they still use. In Canada, the UK, I'm pretty sure Australia still uses the term driver even for modern day operations. But in the United States, they're operators. So Pittsburgh still had quite a few horse car lines, and this is the only evidence I've found of one horse operation. In Pittsburgh, it's very hard to find anywhere that's flat enough to be able to have a single horse running the cars. But this is a fairly small car. It was on a line that was relatively level out towards Bowerstown. And so you could have single horse operations. So our horse car, this is a roundabout way of getting there. Our horse car, again, was one of the last horse cars in the city. There were two of them. The last one, M275, went to the Brashear Club, if I'm not mistaken. Or at least that's the story. Ours was kept by the or kept by Pittsburgh Railways and then given to the county of Allegheny or Allegheny County. And Allegheny County took it to their museum at the South Park Fairgrounds. It was displayed there at the fairgrounds for many, many years until the early 1970s, when it was given to the Trolley Museum. When it was given to the Trolley Museum, we didn't have somewhere to store it. So Meadowcroft Village very kindly let us keep it there for 5 or 6 years between the time that we received it from the county and the time that we actually received a grant to improve and restore the car. This is a picture of it coming across the fields from Meadowcroft Village in Avella, Pennsylvania, which is a very teeny weeny town out in the hills of the corner of Pennsylvania. And to get to a roadway that was big enough to actually support a truck that size, you had to take it across the hills. So then in 1977, again, we got that grant to restore the car so that it could go down to the newly renovated P&LE, no. Yeah. To the freight house shops at Station Square, where it was going to be part of the whole ambiance there. So this is the car being restored. The whole roof pretty much needed to be made new. The bonnets at the ends of the car were completely shot, even though they had built them new in 1910, 1915, as we saw in the previous picture. The body was clad in metal so that it would be stronger. It had a lot of work done on it until it looked newer. So then once it was restored, they put it on a truck and drove it to Pittsburgh. So some of you may recognize some of these people. Joe, is that you? I think that's you. Ralph Saccone, Homer Westner, my dad, Bruce Wells. There were a whole lot of people that helped out with this. My uncle was the driver of the truck that you can see there. So top left, that's Green Tree Hill. If you're from the area, yeah, our horse car has been on Green Tree Hill. It came down into town, and then it was next to the Gandy Dancer Saloon down at the Freight House shops and the Grand Concourse and all those areas there at the station. Until the year 2000, which that picture on the right-hand side is the day that we went to pick it up to take it back to be taken back for the Trolley Museum. It was actually stored at the Fairbanks Horrocks warehouse for several years, thanks to Frank Fairbanks, who was a member of the Trolley Museum, a very generous person that allowed us to keep it somewhere safe for several years until we were able to build the TDB. And that is where you'll find it today. So there's our horse car. So our car shows up on the Pittsburgh Railways roster starting in 1893. It has had several different numbers, that 101, the number 3, and then I believe it was M3, but I don't see that in my notes. And then our conjecture, our educated guesses, other than it's a Stevenson, I forgot to mention that. So it is a Stevenson horse car, and we guess it's from about the 1870s originally. It's been modified slightly, but the car itself is an 1870s style Stevenson horse car. It ran on several of the different lines throughout the city, but ended its career again on the Union Bridge line. Where can you still find horse cars? I meant to change that picture, but that's fine. Okay, Douglas Horse Tram in Douglas, Douglas, Isle of Man, UK. That's a small island between the United Kingdom, the island of England, Wales, Scotland, Cornwall, and Ireland. There's a little island there, and they have a horse tram that has been running continuously for 145 years. This year is their 145th season. They have lots of different types of horse cars. They have double deckers. They have cars that look like something you'd find in the United States. And then they have what they call toaster rack cars, or toast rack. I forget which it is. But that's their name for open cars. They use one horse, unlike us for the most part. And most of the time for them, it's a draft horse, like a Shire or a Clydesdale, as opposed to in the United States, where a lot of the time we used lighter horses in pairs. The Victor Harbor horse-drawn tramway in Port Victor, South Australia. It actually runs out on a pier for part of the trip, and they've been running for many years. You can go to Disney and ride on the horse car through the Main Street USA portion of the parks. Disney World, Disneyland, and Disneyland Paris, Euro Disney, they all have one. So you can actually go ride horse cars there. Now, Ardenwood Farm, I found out today, does not have their horse railroad any longer. I rode that. But there's regulations for it. So that was one that I didn't get to take out. And then the Dobeln Straßenbahn is a horse tram that was rebuilt in the city of Dobeln, which is in the eastern part of Germany. It would have been in the Eastern Bloc. And they rebuilt this line in 2007, built new streets, put new track in, and their example of a horse car that they have in their museum, because they have a Pferdestraßenbahn museum in the town of Dobeln, is a Dresden Brill horse car that was later used as a trailer in the city of Dresden. So it's amazing that it's still around, because we didn't do nice things to Dresden in World War II. But there is a Brill, a teeny weeny little Brill horse car that is still around, and it's in Europe. So that's interesting. And you can go there and ride it. And then there's the Hokkaido Village, where they have horse cars as part of their setup. And then I have lots and lots of resources. I hope I got them all. And then there's a little bit about me, and there's my horse, Lucy.
Awesome. Hey, Sarah,
Okay.
leave that slide up
Okay.
for the end. Is this your last slide?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. There was a lot of good discussion in the chat that you can read through. We'll bring this slide back up in just a second, but before we get to questions, I do want to let everybody know that we do have more Trolleyologies coming up soon. August 10th, we'll have Carline Adventures. I think it's going to be mostly interesting tales that Father Jack has found in his newspapers.com research about all sorts of strange things that happened on trolley. So that should be a really fun presentation. And then in September, we'll have Pittsburgh Railways Interurbans. And I do want to thank everybody again for joining us tonight, and especially those who made a donation during their registration process. We'll keep these going monthly or so through the fall at least. I have people scheduled through November, and we've gotten lots of great feedback from this. So we want to continue to stay in touch with our members and viewers near and far. Thank you again. I will allow everybody to unmute themselves in just a moment so you can ask questions of Sarah directly, and feel free to turn on your videos now. If I turned it off and you can't turn it back on, just let me know in the chat. And then Sarah, whenever you'd like, you can put your slide back up.
Oh, okay.
So people can read about you.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh boy, you can read about me. Yay.
All right.
So I saw somebody commented in there about
Oh, sorry, I accidentally just muted you.
That's okay. I unmuted myself.
Got
So I saw somebody put in the comments about Speedy. I'm so sorry. I meant to talk about that. The last Harold Lloyd silent movie was actually called Speedy, and it was about horse cars. And if you ever want to see a horse car chase scene, where I'm pretty sure they destroyed them. Sorry, I'm going to start my video. It's a fun movie. It even has the Great Bambino in it, early in his career. It's got Babe Ruth in a part of the movie that doesn't really matter, but there's lots of horse car footage, and it's fun.
Ever seen Speedy? No.
And it's available for free online.
I've seen it
I made
twice.
the comment, and there's lots and lots of great New York City 1928 scenes
Yes.
in that movie.
Yes. Yeah, we enjoyed it. We watched it on the giant TV here one night, and it's interesting. Any other questions?
When the Glenwood Car House was torn down in 1966, they found in the basement where there was still hay and manure.
Not surprised.
What's that?
There'd be a lot of it, so not entirely surprised.
And
Yeah. I believe, Sarah, and some of you know, Woodland Car House was an early car house in 1858 with an addition about 1911. When they were adding on to that addition and starting to dig it up, they found all sorts of bones. So that was the graveyard.
That's
You had to
interesting
do
too.
something with them.
And I meant to include a picture of our electric cars stop here or whatever it says, Dad, sign
Yeah,
that came from.
that came from the doorway or in front of Glenwood Car House.
So
There's a
that's
porcelain
electric
sign.
cars. So that's electric cars stop here as opposed to horse cars stopping there?
Correct.
Yes, yeah, because that was one of the first electric lines. And so they must have had, they must have, I don't know.
Well,
they
I'm
were
guessing it wasn't
emphasizing
electrified once they went in.
but it was it's a porcelain sign, and I think it was torn off the building to get it. It's broken on one side, and I can't say as I've seen it for a while, but it was around the museum for a long time. John
I'm
Baginski
pretty
knew
sure.
where it came from, and I forget who. The origins of the museum collection, 4398 and 3047, were stored at Glenwood Car House in the late 50s, and so the members spent a lot of time there cleaning up 3047 and 4398 to get them ready for use on fan trips and things, particularly the NMRA convention that Uncle Louis organized in
He was in one of the pictures too.
1958, 59, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, no, but I mean, I made the comment in the chat, and you had a really wonderful show, and I really enjoyed this. The one epilogue that a lot of people don't know, but the movies are fantastic, and that is in New Haven up until 1947, when every time the Yale Bowl was played in the stadium at New Haven, and tons of students would come up, and they kept an entire fleet of open cars just for that one day. And you'd see movies of anywhere from 25 to 50 open cars with people hanging all over the cars on both sides. And a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, Warehouse Point's open car is a relic of that thing.
Yeah, I would say all of the New England open cars, the ones at Seashore and the ones at Brantford, they're all,
That's why.
that's how they survived. They were at New Haven.
Imagine
Any
keeping
other
all
horsepower
fleet for
questions?
one day.
I might be better at answering this.
What's that?
Horse car question.
There's lots of good comments in the chat.
Hold on, I'll go check again.
No, but it's just people saying, well done.
Oh,
I thought that was
okay.
a great, like, that was a great presentation for the general public and people who don't know much about horse cars. So thank you very much.
So were the horse cars going past the Capitol, picking up or dropping off manure?
Oh, I'm sure it was a lot of both.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So side note for anyone looking for this program on YouTube later this week, my internet went out for like the first 5 minutes of Sarah's show. So I'm hoping that nothing weird happened while we were going through. I rejoined and it seemed to be normal. So we'll see if the recording came out. But Sarah, I might have to ask you to redo the first 5 minutes of your
Oh, good.
But so we might be a little delayed putting this on YouTube, so I apologize for that. But we'll see what happened when the recording uploads to Zoom. So, but yeah, any other questions for Sarah or about PTM's horse car or horse cars in general?
Sarah, are we going to have a fair shirt this year?
Yes, it's already designed, and there's supposed to be a thing going out about it for those of you that are here for the fair that would like a shirt. Laura had a order form, I think.
All right, I haven't seen it yet.
I will mention that to her.
Thank you.
Yes, and for anyone wondering what the fair is, the Washington County Agricultural Fair is coming up in mid-late August, and it's kind of a big reunion for PTM members and volunteers, and everybody comes out, and we run lots of trolleys at once, and I hear it's very exciting. I haven't been to one myself yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. I think a lot of people on this call will be there, which is very exciting.
Yeah, we've been known to run from 10 a.m. till midnight.
Yeah, that's 14th to the 21st this year.
14th to 21st. Thank you, Dawn.
Got a calendar right there.
Ding.
Oh, and Paul, you said something about a horse railroad. There's actually a good picture that I really wanted to include that I forgot about. That's Warren, Pennsylvania, and their log railroad was powered by horses as well.
Oh.
For trees, because that's what Pennsylvania was known for back in the day. Trees. Pennsylvania. It makes sense.
There, I think a long time, I can't remember where I saw this. You know, you showed pictures of the horses riding on the car. And of course, these horses would be good for 4, 5, 6 years, and then they would be sold, mostly to farmers. And I remember reading the tale of some farmer that, you know, the horses would pull up the hill, but they would try to get on his wagon on the way down. They had been conditioned to do that.
Yes, well, I mean, the condition thing, it was very important. The horses would actually, a lot like the milkman and his horse would learn the route. The horses learned their routes on for the horse cars. There was a story about in Connecticut, they actually had a barn fire, which was one of those huge hazards that was a bigger problem back when they had horses and they didn't have electricity. So they had like gas lamps and whatever,
all that hay.
And all that hay, which is known to spontaneously combust. They had a fire in one of the horse stables of a horse car line, and they were able to get all of the horses out. And part of the reason that the horses didn't try to get back in the barn, which is usually a huge problem with getting horses out of a fire because they want to go back home, is because they paired themselves up and they started just wandering through the streets on their normal trip. So they didn't have to corral them right away. They took them out, they paired themselves up, and they went on their trip. So there were these random pairs of horses wandering through town, trying to do their normal horse car runs.
The piece of step rail that I gave the museum that came out of suburban Philadelphia was dated back to the horse car days. I gave out.
Barry Baker had a question from a tour. I don't know if anyone knows the answer. I'm not sure if Barry is still on, but he said he had a guest ask him recently what the horse car weighs with and without passengers, PTM's horse car. Anybody know that factoid? It might be in our guidebook, but
I've heard it weighs 2 tons.
Huh.
I don't remember where I read that, but that seemed high to me.
Yeah, that sounds high.
Yeah.
Considering that it only takes, if you're on
You can push it with
straight
one
rail,
person on
it
level
just takes
track.
1 or 2 people to push.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to look that up.
4 of us pushed it up the hill from the shop to the main line.
He brought me some good news.
Yeah, but being able to push it is more a function of how good the bearings are rather than how much it weighs.
Also true.
Well, the bearings aren't that good.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know. I know they're
They've
in
never
there.
had
I
anything
never
done.
looked at them, but I didn't consider them to be, nothing was ever done with them. So
Well,
Yeah,
I
well,
can
that's
push my automobile out of the garage by myself.
it's got roller bearings.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, well, you can do the same thing.
You can do
One
that with a
person-
PCC too, though.
One
I've
person
pushed
can push a
by
PCC
myself.
truck
Really?
all over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the truck on the curbside car, same way. Because I just did it the other day and I don't push things well anymore.
No,
Oh,
no,
does
the
it-
trucking company wouldn't know because it was my uncle.
Because it was
No, the trucking company
No.
wouldn't know. No,
No, my uncle Larry.
he took it down there.
Oh, the other uncle, yeah.
Took it down there. I mean, the flatbed that brought it back might, but even then, it didn't weigh enough for it to be
No.
considered.
Well, it went out to Frank's
Yeah.
business and then it went to Charlie Fife's.
Yes.
I just checked the
Business.
guidebook and,
And
it
then
doesn't
eventually,
in there.
but it isn't in the guidebook. I can
No.
tell you
No.
that because
Because
I
he
know something about the guidebook.
We might have a lot of trouble trying to weigh the thing.
Well, if you got 4 bathroom scales that go up to 500 pounds, it'd probably get it.
Oh yeah, that'd be clever. Yeah, I'd like to see that.
I feel like that's a bad idea. But yeah, so it's very light considering what it did, but
Yeah.
it's not, horse cars were built that's why they couldn't use many of them going forward, is because they were built too light to really handle what electric motors were going to do to them.
Yeah.
Sarah, you're a horse person, and of course, my age, I remember when I was a kid in the city of Philadelphia was still using horses to pull the horse-drawn ash carts. And
Yep.
basically what it is, you put your coal ashes out separate. They pick them up in a horse-drawn ash cart
So you can make
and
something.
or dump them for landfill. Also, and in fact, the city had near where the airport is now, it's long gone. They had what was called the model farm. That's where the retired horses went. And for fire horses, once they were used by the fire department, they were no good for any other
Couldn't
use,
use for anything else.
because once they picked up the smell or the commotion, they took off. And
Yes.
it was often said that once the horse picked up the odor of the smoke, the driver lost control of them. They just took off by themselves.
Now, fire horses are a whole, they were definitely something akin to a sports car, or it's amazing. There's a really good video actually of, or a film, like an Edison film of the call being made and the bell ringing
Yeah.
and the horses. They
That was
actually
back
had a
then.
whole system to let the horses out of their stalls. They went up to their spots on the engine, and they had rigging that dropped their harness down
Right.
onto them,
Right.
and then they take off.
Yeah.
It's 15 seconds or something like that.
My relation to horses
Under-
was back when I was a kid in the Meadows section of Philadelphia, when we had the horses there. And of course, as a kid, you know what my job was: cleaning the stables with my cousins.
Yeah, I know all about that.
He would.
Yes, Sarah's cleaned a stabler too.
I'm sure of that.
Sarah, another
There's
interesting-
movies, 8mm movies of the double end cars running in West Philadelphia, and there's rag pickers, and
Oh
Like
yeah,
rag and
yeah,
bone.
yeah.
and there's also milk
Yeah.
delivery wagons.
Well,
Well,
In the
actually,
front.
they figured out that milkmen were more efficient when they had horses, because it was like an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah,
The
I was-
horses knew their route, so the milkman could go, once the horse learned the route, they would just run back and forth from the truck to the houses, and the horse would go, and it would know where to stop too.
That's correct. I remember they
No.
used to have, Abbott's used to keep their wagons on what was now they call it Columbia Avenue, Delaware Avenue. And I remember as a kid being in Methodist Hospital on Broad Street, looking out the window and watching the horse-drawn milk wagon from Abbott's. Yeah, he walked along and of course took the wagon. Yeah, well, Philadelphia was full of progress, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Still is.
Autonomous vehicle before it was a thing.
The counties were getting closed in trash trucks, and we were just getting trucks.
Any other
Very
questions?
interesting question about replenishing the horses just came in.
Okay.
So did the horse car companies like breed horses, or did they always purchase them? Or
They always purchase them. 'cause
okay,
there's so long between when you make
Make
new
a horse.
and when you can use a new horse. Many times a horsecar horse was a horse that had come from a certain place. Like if you've ever read or watched Black Beauty, any of the movies, horsecar horses were not at the top of the social ladder. Like that, a horse like that would be used for personal use by rich people. Further down the list were cart horses and things like that that did professional work, and that would include horsecar horses. So they were more sought after than like probably the Rag and Bone Man's horse, but they were also not as high up as the fancy horses that the rich people would have, if that makes any sense. It was usually a bump down, like if a horse wasn't good enough, if there were blemishes on the horse, if it needed to be strong, but that was pretty much it, and healthy.
were they all male horses?
Oh no,
Oh, okay.
They used males, females, whatever.
Buildings.
Yes, yeah, geldings. They didn't generally use horses. Snip,
Yeah.
snip. Because that just breeds
Cause
problems.
problems,
So many
yes.
ways. Yes.
Yeah.
Like my great grandfather worked for one of the companies that made up the Philadelphia Rapid Transit, and back in the horse car days, and he had a cousin that was a famous horse thief, and I always said that maybe he stole the horses and Harry stole the horses and William put them on the horse cars. I don't know.
I think Ed Torpy's dad worked in that kind of business out in West Philadelphia too.
Yeah.
Sarah? Do you have
Yes.
any idea what you've got the weight, we talked about the weight of and I'm assuming an empty horse car. Now, how
Yeah.
much weight does it add when a full load of people get on?
Well, let's see.
What do you think?
In our horse car, it could probably hold 20 people in a standing load,
Yeah, probably.
maybe more. Well, let's see, 20 times.
4,000 pounds.
Yeah, another 4,000 pounds.
You know, not
For a
not
pair
no
of horses, like in good condition, that's not really that hard. Doing it all day, that would be hard.
Yeah.
Up
And
the hill.
in Pittsburgh, we generally used, or the companies generally used smaller horses than other places. Our teams were like 1,400 pounds or 1,800 pounds. They were not very large horses. Like a 700 to a 900 pound horse is not a bit, it's not a draft horse. That would be very not prototypical for our Pittsburgh lines. I have a theory as to why they always use teams of smaller horses because they would be slightly cheaper and you can always get back on one cylinder.
Question, did they always change the horse teams at the barns, or did they have like street relief where you would like change horses like along the route, or
That's
the
an
barns
excellent
along
question.
the route?
I think they usually worked it so that they would have to come back to the barn for their switches. I know the Isle of Man, that's how they do it.
Mhm.
Is the barn is not at the ends of the line, it's towards the middle.
Yes.
And when the horses are coming back through, they know that it's their turn to walk.
In Philadelphia,
At least that's how it used to be.
in Philadelphia, they had a high number of barns that were later
Yeah.
closed up. But I think for that reason, and like you say, and what George mentioned about Woodland was in the middle of several lines. And in fact, several lines crossed right there. So it was a great place to change horses.
Yeah, Woodland.
And I mean,
Woodland line
it's
was
a lot
very
easier to
early
change
on.
them there because
Yeah.
there's the tacking and untacking. They probably, a horse car harness is very, very simple. Usually it's the collar, which is the part that transfers the energy that they push against, and there's the traces. And each horse would have their own basically, because that's all they use for their harness. Like an actual harness for driving horses has a lot more parts.
Well, didn't they have to have individual collars because each one is shaped to fit the
Fitting, yes.
horse?
Because it's very, very important that the collar fits really well. Because if it doesn't, they get sores and then you can't use the
Yeah,
horse.
it's like having the wrong shoes.
Yes. Yes.
In Philadelphia, the first electric car came into operation at the end of 1892, and the last horse car ran in 1897.
Mm-hmm.
So by the 20th century, we were all electric.
Yes. Now, Philadelphia switched over pretty quickly. A lot of cities, for the most part, switched over quickly. Pittsburgh had a couple of those lines that it wouldn't have been easy to electrify. So they kept those with horse cars. Like the Union Bridge, it was a covered bridge. They were worried about electrifying it. Now, if you look at the pictures that they took, that the city, I think, took while they were in the process of demolishing, it sure looks like there's two sets of wire troughs up there in the eaves of it. But they might have done that and then realized that electric cars were just too heavy for that particular bridge. Because they did definitely use our horse car on it.
Yeah, I believe
Covered
the
bridges had all
South Side
kinds of-
line, the Sarah Street line, no pun intended, which paralleled.
No, I know.
Yeah, but it paralleled Carson Street by only one block. And I think by running that horse car, it sort of acted as a foil for other competing transit systems. And as long as they could run that thing, they had a franchise and nobody else.
Well, it was the
could run
franchise,
that,
which
you know.
the whole movie, Speedy, the whole movie, that it's about the franchise. So that, just so you know.
I've heard stories that the driver of the Sarah Street car, when he retired, the line was abandoned.
Yeah, that was my understanding too. He was really old.
75.
Yeah.
Oh, that
I
was
mean,
old back
75 at that time with a job like that. Yeah,
Mm.
you were.
Frank, the driver.
Yes, Frank. That's what his name was.
Yeah, why? That's why we had our cat, Frank. Oh wait,
No, that was.
Oh, that was
Frank,
Frank.
I know.
There are lots of famous Franks.
I'm just pulling that out of my head.
Oh,
you don't mind.
You did.
You may have answered this already, but the gauge of the horse railway, was that also 5'2.5"?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it was. And this is a discovery. You can tell that I'm excited about this. So Pittsburgh was 5'2.5", and a lot, like there were a few lines that were 5'2". There were a few lines that were, and you can find this all in Street Railway Journal, just so you know. But they consolidated to 5'2.5" eventually. Philadelphia was about 50-50 split between 5'2.5" and 5'2" even. And when they consolidated, they decided it was 5'2.25", I guess. And the best part, my the piece de resistance is that Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is an oddball in our state because all of their more modern cars are standard gauge, was 5'3" when it was horse cars.
Same as
Probably
Altoona.
prior to the flood. So there, like Altoona, like Dad said.
Wait, so what was Altoona?
5'3".
Oh, okay.
As was Columbus, Ohio.
Just for horse cars or also for electric streetcars?
Well, Johnstown had their giant flood in 1890 or 1889. And in 1885, their horse car lines were 5'3", according to Street Railway Journal. I haven't gotten to look to see if they have the data for after, because if you look in Street Railway Journal, they have each issue They have all of the data for the different car lines in each city listed by city. And they'll have information like the gauge, the weight of rail that they used, how many cars they had, how many horses or mule, well, how many horses, how many mules, or if they have some other motive power, what that is.
But they don't give you the weight of the car.
They do not give you the weight of the car. But then again, a lot of lines had different manufacturers or different purchases, and they would be different. So, I mean, that was.
Hey, Bruce, somewhere I read that after the flood, Johnstown went to standard railroad gauge. Did you ever
Yes.
see? Yeah, that's what I heard, because there were something about bringing railroad cars or something into the town or something.
Well,
it was probably simpler.
It is the outlier as far as the as far as the route across Pennsylvania. Conestoga wagons. If you go to the Landis Valley Farm Museum, Conestoga wagons are 5'3".
Yeah.
When you measure the wheels.
Yeah.
And the, Ed Liebarger came up with this years ago. He said that
Bullshit.
that the he said that the ordinances in Pennsylvania regarding street railways, there was no state law, there was no mandate for the gauge. That the ordinances for local building lines on the local streets was that they would be in conformance with the wagons of the area, the commonly used wagons of the area.
Yeah, it was
But I
called
think-
carriage gauge. And
Yeah.
maybe after the flood, Sarah, excuse me, that if you were able to find the old legislation after the flood, they may have actually redone that. Maybe the streets were so torn up and they came up with
I think it was just
new
simplicity.
franchise.
Yeah.
Because if you just build everything to the same gauge, it will be simpler. Because they had nothing
Well,
after.
Yeah.
They would have had to have a way to get the building materials to build new houses into the neighborhoods.
Right.
And the easiest way to do that would have been to build railroad tracks down the street.
Yeah,
And then when they were done with them, just make them into the car lines.
that was my understanding.
Yeah, that's all that's a theory I came up with, and you may have heard me say it.
Yeah.
But nevertheless,
Sounds like a new program.
yeah, right. It sounds like somebody had researched that.
Okay.
to see.
Paul asked about steam dummies. Generally, I mean, if they were transitioning to something else, yes, they might use a steam dummy, but for the most part, no, because a horse car line was generally going to be something simple to use. Did the horses in street railway service have names or numbers? Yes, many of them had names. I know today the Douglas tramway, definitely everything has a name because they have little nameplates. They probably had numbers, or they might have had pet names for them. There isn't specific things I found about that, but I found stories about specific horse teams or horses. There's like a morbidly funny story about this horse car horse that they'd gotten from, I think, a racetrack that was horrible, to the point of they tried everything to get it to just be normal, and basically it exhausted itself at some point. They would keep it out on the line to try and get it to be, steady, and it was never going to be that way. And it was morbidly funny.
They should have put him on the express route.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. No,
please.
I driving horses can be very dangerous, especially if they get loose in the city. So, and they will easily be able to pull a horse car off the rails. That is off the rails.
Well, that'd be perfect for express. You could go around the slow cars.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen Speedy, again, horse car chase scenes. So it's like that. No, that's fine. Questions are good. I am an
There's
elementary
also the
teacher. I
Titfield
like questions.
Thunderbolt.
What about?
The Titfield Thunderbolt.
Yes, but
That's-
that's not a horse car, is it?
But no, but that's driving steam locomotives down the street.
That is driving steam locomotives cross country. Yes, off
Yeah.
the rails.
Yeah.
Hey, you know,
Unimpeded by reality.
Yeah.
there was another use for horses drawing cars in the city. Early in the 19th or throughout most of the 19th century, railroad depots were not built in the center of the city because they didn't want steam trains running through the city. So the depots were built sort of like on the edges, and if a train was going to go through, they uncoupled the train into separate cars, and they had tracks running through the city, and they would hitch horses to each railroad car and pull that through the city streets up to the depot, say on the other side of town, and the train could continue its trip from there. Say like a train going from Washington to Philadelphia to New York. In Philadelphia, they would draw the cars separately by horses from one depot to another.
And in the UK, they actually had draft horses that they used as shifters in the yards until the 60s.
Wow.
But they like to do things like that over there.
I have a question because
hold on. I had a question in the chat about, do horses recognize their names? Yes. Picking out names that to a certain extent, it's a tonal thing. But they definitely learn like their name and what you mean when you say certain things. Like they recognize words and they recognize the way that you say them. Like if you yell at a horse, especially if it's a trained horse, like, hey, cut that out. They know and they will generally stop what they're doing. And they know words, walk, trot, canter, whatever. So that was in the chat. Somebody else had a question.
Well, yeah, I did. And it is a horse question because I have the 1895 and 96 books, I think, of Philadelphia tracks and their handwritten accident reports. And it's an incredible amount of runaway wagons. Things scare them and, people fall off and die and get hurt. So how well behaved were the Horsecar horses in relation to these regular teams that cruise through?
Well, a lot of it has to do with two factors. One, how seasoned the horses were, and two, the drivers, because the drivers didn't actually have any real qualifications. A warm body that said they knew how to drive horses was pretty much, you could be a driver. So there were experienced, really good drivers. There were really good teams, but when you combine a bad team with a bad driver, which would happen, you end up with problems like that. And that's true with horses forever. If the person doesn't really know what they're doing and they're working with a team that doesn't know what they're doing either, it just ends up badly. Green with green makes black and blue or something like that.
Have a runaway horse car then?
Oh, very much so. Yes. Because a pair of horses, even medium-sized horses, can turn into just bad stuff. Because they've got a lot more, like it's horsepower, but when Watt came up with his horsepower, he kind of underrated it a little bit, and horses can actually produce a lot more horsepower in short bursts. They can't do it over an extended period of time, but you can develop a lot of that horsepower energy in a short amount of time.
Wow.
And that's when it becomes more of a problem.
Oh, thank you so much for answering that.
Yeah, no problem.
Were there other animals besides horses and mules? You said, like the other day you said oxen, but were there other ever any exotic animals used?
Well, donkeys and oxen were occasionally used, but oxen are really slow. During the epizootic, oxen were used like everywhere. You see pictures during late 1872, and there will be like wagons pulled through the streets by oxen because they're not susceptible because it's an equine disease. Donkeys are used some places, but they're generally small, so they're not as adept. They don't have the oomph.
I've seen pictures of Ringling Brothers wagons being pulled by zebras.
Yes, zebras. I've seen pictures of elephants somewhere.
Camels?
They already had the racing stripes on
Camels,
them, too.
that wouldn't surprise me. I know that Ringling Brothers definitely used it in their circus parade. But I'm trying to think. And llamas, maybe?
No, they carry things there rather than
They're
pulling
usually
them.
pack animals, but they can pull things.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of anything else that just something like that would probably be mostly for like Ringling Brothers or some other spectacle rather than actual use. Because we've had horses for a long time for fairly good reasons.
Yes.
They're tractable for the most part. They do spooky things, but
am I
they can be
correct? I
trained.
thought I saw a picture somewhere. It was a hand-drawn picture during the epizootic you described. And I think it was in New York where they just got
Yes.
gangs of the unemployed and
Yes, because
put them to
labor
pull
was cheap and
cars.
horses weren't.
You know, and we didn't have OSHA and a whole bunch of federal, just give them a cup of coffee and a sandwich and say, get up.
Now they found out that they didn't work as well. As horses. Too many minds. That's why having a very large team of horses is going to be more difficult to deal with. Well, you've got to have, 10 people to pull the horse car, and each one of those has its own mind.
More or less.
Yeah.
Must have been fun to watch.
Yeah, no, there's definitely two different etchings, and I was desperately trying to find it because I found it once and I don't know what I did with it.
So the Borg would work well for.
Yes, the Borg Collective is an excellent motive power.
All right. On that note, I think it might be time to wrap this discussion up. If we have any other questions, I will allow them. But any further questions related to horse cars or anything else for Sarah?
What would happen with breakdowns? Would another horse be sent out, or the following car push? Well, the following car would definitely not push because they don't have that capability. But either they would bring another horse in, or like my theory about why in the United States they usually use pairs is because you can bring the wagon home on one cylinder if you only have the one. And the way that the harness is set up on a horse car, it makes it very conducive to that. They just use that collar, and the traces are the part that connects back to the car itself. There isn't a pole for the most part. The pole on like a wagon, when you have a pair of horses, goes down the center. And what it allows you to do is back the wagon up. Most horse cars were not equipped with that because they didn't figure you'd need to back them up. You just go to the other end of the car and go the other direction. And there's brakes on the streetcar to be able to make it stop. So the harness was very simple, and you could hitch the horse up so that it was the only one pulling. Now, would you want to do that all the time? No, but I think that that's probably what they would just do instead of having to go find another horse.
And if the horse car itself broke down, would they just push it off the track and leave it in the street until they could?
My guess is yes. I mean, they're not that heavy. Or, I mean, I'm not sure what could happen to it that bad other than maybe a wheel breaking. And then I would think you could have some sort of dolly or something. Because again, at this time, it wasn't like you had a truck that could fly out and help you with that. You'd have to have a wagon pulled by more horses to bring anything big. So for the most part, I think they probably did what they could on site and then, get it out of the way.
Okay.
All right. Any final questions for Sarah?
Yeah, I'm curious if you know of any trolley museums or any place other than like Disney World or the historic farms or such that have just said, let's try and get the horse car to run.
A couple places. Kelly Park in San Pedro. What is it?
And
San Jose, I think.
San Jose. That's it.
San
I knew it was
Jose,
San
yes.
something. Kelly Park has definitely used theirs.
Yeah.
I know that Baltimore has pulled theirs around, but theirs had tires on it, so they could pull it more places than just one. Let's see. Seashore operated their horse car. Thank you, Joel. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anybody else other than us.
So what's stopping you?
It's on the books. It's secret until such time I'm allowed to divulge it.
Until 5 seconds ago.
Yeah. I mean, we've never done that, but
Yeah.
it's in
Well, we
forecast.
pushed it. You know, we pushed it.
Yeah, we've
around.
pushed it. I've been on the horse car when we
Winnie and
pushed
May stuff, you know.
the brakes work reasonably well.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's been used.
All right. We still have almost 30 people here, so people are clearly interested in hearing about the horsies. So any other final questions before we sign off here?
No, I ask a lot of questions when I thoroughly enjoy a show. So I
Oh,
think Sarah
thanks.
has done an excellent job talking about the horse cars, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
But it's a rainy night in Georgia, so I'm still here.
Basically veterinarian.
Yeah, and it's gonna
It's
get
a rainy night up here in Mount Lebanon too. So
Actually, the mechanical department wasn't necessarily veterinarians. They had a lot of grooms and things like that, and they would usually have one shop steward type person that was, instead of a veterinarian, they were just somebody that was very experienced. You'll see advertisements in Street Railway Journal for those supervisor type people, either looking for positions or companies looking for that type of person. Otherwise, mechanical, I mean, you had to make sure that the cars were going to stop.
Mm.
The harness, yes, the harness, you'd have to have harness maintainers and cleaners. Cleaning things was the biggest thing mechanical wise that was that required the labor.
manure shovelers.
Yes, manure, the ostlers in the yard that clean stalls, and there were multitudes of designs that they came up with, different ways to stable the horses, different types of bedding. For the most part, today horses live in box stalls for the most part when they're in a stall environment, usually about 12 by 12. At that time, it wasn't uncommon for horses to just be in a tie stall. It might be about 6 feet wide, 8 to 10 feet long, and they were tied and they would have their feet in front of them, and they can move a little bit, but they're out working all day. So it wasn't felt to be as critical that they have that. They could usually in the space that they had be able to lay down. And a lot of the good horsemen felt that that was important, which it is, because horses don't, to get the proper sleep, to get REM sleep, horses need to be able to lay down, and it's not super common for them. But if they don't get that, you'll notice the difference in your horse. So the good horsemen that were running systems knew that kind of thing and would take care of that.
Well,
follow the horse. No, they had street cleaners. That was a city job.
Because there were lots of other horses out there on the street.
It wasn't just horse cars that were
And
producing.
there were lots of sparrows because they like to feed on the feed.
There were probably a lot of those too.
And that would have been a
Feed is
commodity
rough.
then, wouldn't it too?
Yes.
well, Sarah, do you know? I
Disney
know this,
does have one, but that's because
uh,
they don't have anything else on the street.
Maybe
And you
this,
can have like horsey diapers. I'm sorry.
No, that's
George.
okay. I'll let you finish. But this question may be a crock. But do you know? I mean, if you have a system like Philadelphia, so they
Yes.
might have had 6 teams per horse car per
Yes.
day, and that's an
Yes.
awful lot of manure to move around. Was
Yes.
there a system to get it first into some conveyance and get it out of the
Yes.
barn, and then
Yes.
they had a big pile of manure somewhere that smelled
Well,
great?
like in Philadelphia, they probably had again that vertical stabling system where they would have the barn, the car house at the bottom, and then the actual stables were up above. And I know Pittsburgh had this and lots of other places. So they would have chutes at the ends of the aisles, at the ends of the stable aisles, that would send it down to wagons down below. And there's actually, in Street Railway Journal, there are articles about good stable management, about how you set up your barn to best deal with all of that. Having troughs for the urine, which they also collected because you use that for making ammonia and all kinds of other things.
Yes.
So it, all of those were commodities. They were not just something you have to get rid of. You don't send it to the landfill like some places.
In London, there's an old ice house at the terminus of a canal boat run where they've got a ramp that the horses would go up and down, and it's got cleats across it.
Yep.
I guess I'm kind of surprised that they didn't make the horse car or streetcar companies clean up after the horses in the street, because didn't they make them clear the snow from the street and do the maintenance between the tracks and everything? So I actually
they did, but how are you going to tell which horse did what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so I'm guessing they may have charged them something for the street cleaning, but
But that manure was a valuable commodity.
Yeah.
So manure was a valuable commodity. They didn't have petroleum-based fertilizers yet, for the most part. So it was much sought after to get all of those nutrients back out of the manure and send them out to farms. They, city of San Francisco had barges, like sail barges, that they would fill up and send to other places. I know anywhere that had rivers, there would be barges that were filled with it.
Boy, that must have been fun to work on.
Hey.
Well, the whole world smelled bad then. So
yeah, I know.
Olfactory inattention.
Yeah, that. An interesting factoid that popped into my head. There's a really interesting photo of just after the introduction of electric cars. Duquesne Gardens Car House had a waiting station at the corner where the electric cars pulled in off the street. That was a horse car. They parked a horse car there, and and it shows up in a photo that I have seen.
Was that on Ellsworth or?
Yeah,
I think Ellsworth was the street that went in.
It went between Ellsworth and Craig.
Mm-hmm.
But this, this is an old city archive photograph that I've seen, and that was, that was a horse car.
Yeah.
There were a lot of places where electric cars were used like that, like the transfer station at between the Harmony Route and the city. There was an old electric car body that was there that was a waiting shelter. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
was there
it was a building.
Was there a market for the old cars for sheds? I mean, just like you would see that later for electric.
Oh, that's what Sarah's thing
I tried to talk about that. Not as much, because there's no scrap value or very little scrap value to a horse car. They're extremely lightly built. So even using them as a shed or something like that, you're not going to get as much life expectancy out of it. As
you'd have to build a roof over it.
Yeah, you'd have to build a roof over it. But they did use them. In San Francisco, there was a whole village created called Carville by the Sea. And there's a book about it that's actually, I keep meaning to order it, and it was out of print, or they hadn't done the second, anyway, whatever it was. So it was this whole community of bohemians that lived by the ocean in horse car bodies.
Bohemians.
In like the 1890s, like early.
Early bohemians, yeah.
Early bohemians.
Yes, early bohemian.
Yes, but there's a place in Europe called
First of their species to walk upright.
Joel asked about is there like a Disney horse cars horses behind the scenes, like there's kind of behind the scene trains?
Yes, they do have a behind the scenes thing that you can do, because they actually, at each of the parks, I'm not sure about Euro Disney, but I'm 100% sure about Disney World and Disneyland, have both created a horse portion of Disney. They have the, what do they call it? The Three Circles Ranch or something like that. It has to do with the mouse head. Anyway, and I'm pretty sure it's Three Circles Ranch.
Better not be 5.
But it's a horse themed area, you know, a ranchy wilderness. It's in Camp Wilderness or whatever it's called. But they have that in Florida, and they also have one in California that's not actually at the park, or at least that's my understanding, is that they have the ranch, and it's a Disneyland property, but it's not right there at the park, but it's horse based.
Sarah, this is Art. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Hey, did they change teams? Like I thought, like with the canal boats and stuff, didn't they have places along the route where they would change the teams? Did the horse cars change teams during the day, or they just they ran the whole route?
Yes, they definitely changed teams during the day. I think usually it was during the part of the loop, because for the most part, horse car lines used some sort of a loop or a out and back, and you went past the horse car barn at some point. And so they would swap, you know, in that. I don't think they had them out along the line anywhere to switch. It was when they got back from one trip, because none of the lines were extremely long, or at least in the United States or the Pittsburgh area. They weren't really long lines, but they did them several times a day, if that makes any sense.
Well, how many hours would a team be out there before they really need to be changed?
3 or 4, usually. Depending on, but again, that really depends on the terrain that they're doing. Because if it's, you know, Sarah Street in Pittsburgh, it's pretty level.
They're supposed to find you.
Yes, well, they didn't really have horse cars there yet, but if it was one of the ones that comes up through the Pleasant Valley line, probably would need to be changed more often, because that would be a little steeper.
Yeah, there was a horse car on Fifth Avenue too. There's a picture of that somewhere. That was a pretty good.
The Oakland line.
Yeah.
That probably was because they used mules on that line, and there wasn't really anywhere else in Pittsburgh they used them. And mules are more sure-footed and stuff.
Well, I was wondering what the aroma was like in the back in those days. Take a ride down Route 1 through southern Chester County, Pennsylvania, any day of the week, and you'll find out what it's like.
Yeah,
this
mushroom
country, or
it's all mushroom
in
houses.
my opinion, horse manure smells better than cow manure, though. So
yeah.
I mean, derriere is yucky.
Yeah, where you go smell the derriere.
Paul had more questions, including was there street supervision? Did they ride a spare horse to address issues? And did they run on schedules like transit service today?
That's an excellent, they did run on a schedule. There were definitely scheduled trips. I'm not sure how they would do street supervision. I assume that they check things like that, because I mean, certain lines, there wouldn't be a conductor. In Pittsburgh, for the most part, it was a motor or a driver and a conductor. But some places, like I was talking about with the bobtail car, it was one person. So, you know, without management, somebody could be stealing from the company without anybody really knowing. So I assume that they did have, you know, people to do that. I don't know if they would have had a horse or if they just had to hoof it on their own feet.
So to speak.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Was Paul referring to, I see two different things here based on Port Authority. One was, you know, what we would call today the route foreman, the guy in the truck who's actually monitoring the service. And then we always had
the counters,
you know, spies, if you want to use them. That's one of the nicer words that we called them, but they would be on there paying a fare, getting a transfer, making sure it was cut properly, and, you know, in general watching. And you'd get 3-page reports sometimes. Some driver would be called in, and sometimes he'd be complimented and sometimes he'd be spanked based on what the spy saw.
Yeah, so I assume that they had like a route foreman type person, but I haven't seen any accounts or anything like that.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll keep looking.
Could be. a mystery
And then
forever,
you
but-
said in Atlanta, wait, what are the teams would get 1 day off a week. Yeah, that was not uncommon, because especially if it was a system where there were good horsemen that were running it, they wouldn't want to run their investment into the ground. It's like a day of maintenance. So,
All right.
6 days a week wasn't uncommon for teams.
I think our discussion has potentially been longer than your presentation at this point.
Almost the
We,
same.
we don't shut up very well, Kristen.
No, that's great. I mean, I'm happy to help facilitate all these questions and great discussion. So I think we are going to end it there officially. If you have any more questions for Sarah, feel free to email me, and you can find my email address if you don't already know it. It's assistant@patrolley.org. You can find it in the confirmation email that you got tonight, reminding you about the program. So thank you again, Sarah. Thank you again, everybody else, for joining and for your great discussion, great questions. Hopefully once Sarah gets Horsecars Part 2 together, she'll do another Trolleyology.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yes. And then Sarah's mom, Cindy, sent a link, but it didn't work properly there. But yeah, Google Carville on the Sea. It's really, really neat.
It is. There's a
the
lot
other
of
day.
pictures.
Yeah, lots of pictures. Really neat. Really neat.
And for San Francisco, that's relatively early. Like,
yeah.
Plus, they had the whole earthquake thing, so that was an issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and I hope to see you guys next month for our next Trolleyology. Have a great rest of your week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye now. Thank you so much.
Bye.